Imagine boarding first class with your name printed clearly on the ticket, only to be told to move for a white passenger. The seat you paid for. The seat confirmed in your name. But what happened next, nobody saw coming. Not the passengers. Not the airline. Not even the man himself. And if you believe respect has no color, and truth deserves to be heard, then hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Let's begin. It was a calm Monday morning at the Atlanta International Airport. The terminal buzzed with motion, business travelers hurrying between gates, families juggling luggage, announcements echoing overhead. Among them was David Lawson, mid-40s, confident, focused. He wasn't just another passenger. He was the CEO of Lawson Technologies, a billion-dollar company he built from the ground up. At his side was his wife, Janelle, a corporate attorney with quiet strength. They had just wrapped up a charity gala where David pledged millions in scholarships for underprivileged students. The night before, the media called him a symbol of black excellence in corporate America. But today, he was just another traveler, eager to get home. Still, he noticed the usual glances, the kind that question whether a man like him belongs in first class. He had grown used to them. But they never really stopped cutting. At 10:15 a.m., boarding began for Flight 237, nonstop to Los Angeles. First-class passengers were invited first. David and Janelle approached the gate, handed over their passes, and the scanner beeped green. His seat, 1A, front row. The best spot on the plane. He stepped down the jet bridge, feeling calm, grounded. Everything he'd worked for had led him to this point. Quiet rewards of discipline, persistence, and vision. But the moment he stepped through the cabin door, everything changed. The lead flight attendant greeted him with a smile that didn't feel genuine. She glanced at his ticket, then back at him. There was a pause, just long enough to feel wrong. She asked to recheck his boarding pass. Her tone was polite, but uneasy. David handed it over, expecting a simple confirmation. Instead, she frowned slightly, looked toward the front seat, then back at him and said she'd be right back. At first, he didn't think much of it. Mistakes happen. But minutes passed. Passengers started boarding behind him. He could feel eyes on him, quiet curiosity, subtle whispers. Then came another passenger, tall, confident, carrying the kind of attitude that fills a room. His name was Rick Dalton, a venture capitalist and one of the airline's elite members. He stopped beside David, smiled casually, and told the attendant, "There's been some mistake. That seat 1A is mine." The attendant looked at her screen, then at David. Her expression changed. Professionalism turned procedural. She said there'd been a corporate reassignment, that Mr. Dalton's seat had been upgraded. Upgraded to the seat David had already paid for. David stayed calm, asking for clarification. And that's when she used the word that hit harder than anything else: protocol. She said she was just following protocol. Janelle quietly started recording. Other passengers looked on, some pretending not to, others too stunned to hide it. Rick Dalton dropped his bag into the seat and sat down without hesitation. And just like that, the message was clear. This wasn't about a ticket. This was about appearance. A black man in seat 1A didn't fit the image they wanted to see. When David refused to move, a flight supervisor arrived, polite, but rehearsed. He repeated the same words. "There's been a mix-up, sir. We just need to sort this out. Please step off the aircraft for a moment." And so, the CEO, the man who had designed the very cybersecurity systems that protected the airline, was escorted off his own flight. Not for misconduct. Not for a safety reason. But because someone decided he didn't belong. He stood by the large glass window of the terminal, watching through the pane as the plane pushed back from the gate. Flight 237 rolled slowly toward the runway. The seat he paid for was occupied by someone who looked the part. His reflection overlapped with the moving aircraft, and in that moment he thought about everything he'd overcome: the long nights, the rejections, the silent prejudice dressed as professionalism. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd ever been told to step aside. When what they really meant was, "You don't belong here." He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply stood there, silent, composed, and cold inside. Because deep down, he knew something the airline didn't. Their humiliation wouldn't end quietly. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the start of something much bigger. A storm was coming, and it would shake the entire industry. Their humiliation wouldn't end quietly. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the start of something much bigger. A storm was coming, and it would shake the entire industry. The next morning, David Lawson sat in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Atlanta. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Messages. Mentions. News alerts. The video Janelle recorded on the plane had spread like wildfire, millions of views overnight. The title read, "Black CEO removed from first class to make room for white passenger." Every major outlet had picked it up. The airline's PR department went silent. But silence, in the age of social media, is its own confession. The clip showed everything. David calmly questioning the flight attendant, her uneasy replies, the moment security escorted him out. The internet didn't need commentary. The footage spoke for itself. At 9:40 a.m., David's phone rang again, his assistant, Tanya Brooks. "Sir, CNN wants a statement." "So does the FAA. The airline's general counsel just reached out asking for a private conversation." David leaned back in his chair. His voice steady. "Tell them they'll get a statement, but not the one they expect." He turned to Janelle, who sat across from him, laptop open, scrolling through thousands of comments. Some were supportive, others hateful. But the truth was clear. America was watching. By noon, hashtags were trending. Hashtag seat for sale, hashtag Lawson case, hashtag racism in the sky. Celebrities were tweeting support. A senator even called it a national embarrassment. The airline issued a short statement. "We regret any inconvenience caused by an internal seating error. We value diversity and are reviewing our procedures." A seating error. That's what they called it. David read the statement aloud in disbelief. "An error doesn't escort someone off a plane," he said quietly. "An error doesn't tell a man to move because of who he is." He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. He called his legal counsel, Marcus Vance, a former Department of Transportation investigator who now specialized in aviation discrimination cases. "Marcus," David said, "I want everything. Internal communications, security reports, crew rosters, FAA protocols, all of it." Marcus paused. "You're going after the airline?" David's voice was calm, deliberate. "No. I'm going after the system that protects them." Meanwhile, the airline's headquarters in Chicago was in chaos. Emails flew across departments. Executives debated damage control while legal teams scrambled for statements. The flight attendants involved, Carla, Megan, and Tom, were summoned for emergency interviews. Each told a slightly different story. But one thing stood out. Carla, the lead attendant, had noted in her report that the passenger reassignment came from operations control. That meant someone higher up had authorized the switch. Someone in corporate. By 6 p.m., the airline's CEO, Richard Hale, received a call from the FAA. They wanted an internal audit. Immediately. And the Department of Justice had just opened a civil rights inquiry. Hale rubbed his temples, exhausted. "What the hell happened on that plane?" he muttered. His PR director answered quietly. "It's not what happened, sir. It's who it happened to." That night, David and Janelle appeared on live television for the first time. The interviewer asked, "Mr. Lawson, some say this was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Others call it outright racism. What do you call it?" David paused, the room silent. "I call it reality," he said. "I call it the price of pretending progress has been made when the system still decides who's worthy and who isn't." The clip went viral again, but this time it wasn't anger fueling it. It was conviction, the kind that couldn't be dismissed. By morning, the airline's stock had dropped 6%. Investors demanded answers. And that same day, a whistleblower from the airline's operations department reached out to Marcus. She sent an encrypted email with a single line. "Check the seat reassignment log for Flight 237. Attached was a file, a time-stamped record showing that the seat change request came directly from an internal account labeled corp_vipaxis. That account, Marcus discovered, belonged to a senior executive in customer relations. The same executive who had been on a phone call with Rick Dalton, the white passenger, the night before the flight. It was no longer speculation. This wasn't random. This was planned. Rick Dalton wasn't just a passenger, he was an investor in one of the airline's tech subsidiaries. And someone at the top wanted to keep him comfortable. David stared at the evidence. His face unreadable. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked at Janelle and said, "They thought I'd let this die quietly. They were wrong." The next day, David walked into the airline's headquarters unannounced. Security froze the moment they saw him. His face had been all over the news. He walked straight to the front desk and requested a meeting with CEO Richard Hale. When the receptionist hesitated, David placed his phone on the counter and said calmly, "Tell him the man he escorted off his plane is here to discuss corporate accountability before the FAA does it for him." Within minutes, Hale appeared. He forced a smile, offered a handshake. David didn't take it. They walked into the conference room, cameras flashing outside, reporters gathered by the entrance. Inside were company lawyers, PR heads, and a few visibly nervous executives. Hale began, "Mr. Lawson, let me first apologize." David cut him off. "No. You can apologize to the cameras outside. I'm here for the truth." He slid a printed document across the table, the seating log from Flight 237. The one labeled corp_vipaxis. "Explain this," David said quietly. "Explain why my seat was reassigned to your investor the night before the flight." The room went silent. Every executive looked at one another. Nobody spoke. Hale's expression shifted. He knew exactly what that meant. And before he could respond, David said, "You have 24 hours to release a public statement admitting what happened. If you don't, I'll make sure every document, every internal message, every piece of your cover-up goes public." Hale exhaled, trying to stay calm. "Are you threatening us?" David leaned forward. "No. I'm reminding you that accountability isn't a threat, it's overdue." As he stood to leave, security guards approached the door. Reporters had gathered outside, shouting questions through the glass. David paused, turned back to the zoo, and said quietly, "You built a company that believes image is everything. Let's see how you handle the truth." He opened the door. Flashbulbs erupted. Microphones pushed forward. The world was watching. And behind that door, panic began to spread. Executives arguing. Phones ringing. Lawyers whispering. Because they all knew this wasn't just a PR disaster anymore. It was a reckoning. And David Lawson had just declared war. But what came next would force the airline to face more than the media. It would bring the full weight of the law and the country's conscience crashing through their doors. When David Lawson walked out of that conference room, he wasn't just leaving the airline's headquarters. He was walking straight into history. The video had already made him a symbol. But now, the evidence he carried made him a weapon. And the first cracks in the airline story were about to burst wide open. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Whistleblower confirms racism in airline VIP system. FAA to review discriminatory boarding protocols. Lawson demands full transparency. Cable news anchors replayed the same 20-second clip. David sliding that document across the table, his voice low, measured, and deadly calm. Every outlet replayed the look on CEO Richard Hale's face. A man who realized in real time that his entire empire was about to be audited from the inside out. At 10 a.m., the Federal Aviation Administration made it official. An independent review was launched. 2 hours later, the Department of Justice announced a civil rights investigation into discriminatory seating practices within commercial aviation. It was the first joint operation of its kind in over a decade. The message was clear. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about an entire culture of quiet bias, one that had gone unchecked for too long. Inside the airline's Chicago headquarters, panic turned to paralysis. The boardroom lights stayed on through the night. Lawyers argued over statements. PR teams drafted and deleted press releases, and executives whispered about resignations that hadn't been announced yet. The crew of Flight 237, Carla, Megan, and Tom, were called back for questioning. This time, not by company investigators, but by the FAA. Carla sat across from two federal agents in a gray-walled conference room. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her lanyard. Agent Harris, the lead investigator, leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, your internal report says the reassignment came from Operations Control. Can you explain what that means?" Carla hesitated. "It means we received an update through our in-flight management system. It showed Seat 1A reassigned under Corporate VIP Access." "Did you question it?" She looked down. "Not at the time. We're trained not to." The second agent spoke. "Ms. Johnson, were you aware that the passenger reassigned to that seat, Mr. Dalton, had direct ties to your company's investment division?" Carla froze. "No, I wasn't told that." Harris exchanged a glance with his partner. "Then you're about to find out how deep this goes." Meanwhile, David Lawson was in Washington, D.C., meeting privately with Senator Evelyn Moore, chair of the Transportation Oversight Committee. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Lawson, I've reviewed your documentation. If what you're saying is accurate, this isn't just corporate bias. It's a violation of federal non-discrimination statutes." David nodded. "I'm not after revenge, Senator. I'm after reform." Moore leaned back, studying him. "But because you're about to get both." That evening, the FAA announced a temporary suspension of the airline's corporate seat reassignment system, pending a full compliance audit. The stock plunged another 10%. Shareholders demanded an emergency meeting. And in the middle of it all, one of the airline's senior executives, the one tied to the Corp_VIP account, suddenly resigned. But it was too late. The DOJ had already seized his emails. Across the country, in a quiet suburban home outside Dallas, one of the flight attendants, Megan, broke down on camera. She agreed to an exclusive interview with a national network. Tears in her eyes, she said, "I wanted to say something that day. We all knew it wasn't right. But we were afraid to lose our jobs." Her words cut through the noise. For the first time, the public saw the human side of a system that demanded silence. The interview aired that night, and within hours, the airline's internal chat logs began leaking online. Screenshots of staff conversations, mocking passengers, using coded terms like PR priority and demographic reshuffle. The airline's denial collapsed overnight. At 8 a.m. the next morning, federal agents walked into the airline's headquarters with subpoenas. Computers were seized, servers mirrored, executives escorted out of meetings for questioning. News helicopters hovered above the building. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks. Inside, T.O. Richard Hale sat in his office, watching the chaos unfold on live TV. The camera zoomed in on his face. He looked pale, exhausted, cornered. His PR director whispered, "Sir, the DOJ just announced the investigation live. They've named you personally as a respondent." Hale swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. His name was now part of a federal file. Meanwhile, David Lawson returned to Atlanta. He hadn't spoken publicly in 3 days. But that silence was strategic. He was preparing something the airline couldn't spin. A press conference, backed by evidence, with federal witnesses by his side. When the day came, reporters filled the hall. Cameras flashed like thunder. David stepped to the podium, his voice steady, his expression unflinching. "I didn't come here today as a victim," he said. "I came here as a man tired of the excuses that hide behind the word protocol. What happened on that plane wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, executed with precision and approved at the top." He paused. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person who's ever been told, maybe next time, when they've already earned their place." The room erupted in applause. And somewhere in the back of that room, 2 FAA officials exchanged glances. They had just received confirmation from their audit team. The airline's internal systems showed dozens of seat changes, matching the same pattern, all favoring priority passengers over black or brown travelers. Later that evening, the DOJ released its preliminary findings. The report confirmed it. Systematic discrimination through coded corporate access, a practice hidden for years under the guise of customer loyalty. It was national news within minutes. The airline scrambled to issue another statement, this time a real apology. But words couldn't undo what was already unfolding. One by one, crew members were summoned for formal testimony. Carla broke first, then Tom. Under oath, they admitted the truth. They were told to comply and to maintain discretion if questioned by passengers. The DOJ transcript leaked 2 days later, and the public erupted. Protests formed outside major airports. Shareholders began withdrawing. Politicians demanded accountability. And through it all, David Lawson stayed calm, watching from his office window as justice began to turn its gears. He knew this wasn't over yet, because accountability in America never comes without confrontation. That confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days later, the FAA scheduled a joint televised hearing, a public session where airline executives and crew would answer directly to federal inspectors. The invitation wasn't optional. Every face connected to Flight 237 was required to attend. The crew, the executives, and David Lawson. The world would watch. The truth would be spoken, live under oath. As the hearing date was announced, news anchors called it the reckoning in the sky. And when the cameras started rolling, the first person to walk into that hearing room was David Lawson himself, head high, unshaken, ready to face them all, one by one. What no one knew was that before the hearing even began, David had already uncovered one last secret, one that would expose the airline's biggest lie of all. The morning of the hearing arrived. Federal Plaza, Washington, D.C., the marble steps outside the Justice Building were flooded with cameras, journalists, and protesters holding signs that read, "Accountability in the skies," and "Protocol is not an excuse." This was it. The first joint FAA-DOJ public hearing on racial discrimination in aviation history. And the nation was watching. David Lawson's car pulled up to the entrance. He stepped out, composed as ever, suit pressed, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once to the press before walking up the steps. Behind him followed his legal counsel, Marcus Vance, and his wife Janelle, who had stood by him through every storm. Inside the hearing room, tension hung like static. Rows of reporters filled the gallery, lights glaring, microphones ready. On the raised dais sat the FAA's chief investigator, Elaine Porter, and DOJ Civil Rights Director, Alan Reyes. Both looked as if they hadn't slept in days. In front of them, 2 long tables. One for David and his team. The other, for the airline executives and crew members from Flight 237. And seated in the middle of that second table was Richard Hale, toe of the airline, his face pale, his hands folded tightly together. Elaine Porter adjusted her microphone. This hearing is now in session. Our purpose today is to determine the truth behind the events of Flight 237 and to assess whether the airline violated federal non-discrimination and consumer protection laws. The cameras zoomed in on her face, sharp, focused, unflinching. She continued, "Mr. Lawson, thank you for appearing voluntarily. Please begin with your account." David nodded once, leaned into the microphone, and spoke. "On May 14th, I boarded Flight 237 with a confirmed first-class ticket under my name. Minutes later, I was told to step aside for a passenger who, according to the airline, had been upgraded through corporate protocol. I later discovered that this protocol was neither random nor innocent." The room was silent. Every eye fixed on him. He lifted a folder and placed it on the table. These are the airline's internal logs, showing the same seat reassignment system used repeatedly to displace minority passengers for higher-ranking corporate clients. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a system. He paused, letting the words sink in. And the people who enforced it are sitting right here. All eyes turned toward the airline's table. Carla, the lead flight attendant, looked down. Megan stared straight ahead, frozen. Tom shifted nervously. And Richard Hale's jaw clenched. Alan Reyes from the DOJ leaned forward. Mr. Hale, before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to say? Hale cleared his throat, voice trembling slightly. On behalf of the company, I want to extend my sincerest apologies to Mr. Lawson and his family. Reyes cut him off. This isn't a PR event, Mr. Hale. This is a federal inquiry. We're not here for apologies. We're here for truth. He clicked a remote, and the monitors behind him flickered to life. A large screen displayed a series of internal emails, time-stamped, flagged, and highlighted. At the top, one line stood out in bold. Seat 1A reassigned to Dalton. Ensure optics remain professional. Lawson reassignment approved by Corpunders Scrivipaxis. Gasps echoed through the room. The audience murmured. Reyes continued, his voice cold and precise. These emails were obtained through a federal subpoena. They show deliberate coordination between your operations control and customer relations team. Would you like to explain, Mr. Hale, what optics meant in this context? Hale stammered. I'm not sure. Porter interrupted. You're the CEO. You're responsible for every decision made under your corporate chain. If your team uses language implying that the race of your customer affects seating optics, that's not confusion. That's discrimination. Carla's hands shook visibly. She whispered something to Megan, who looked terrified. Porter noticed. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Adams, would either of you like to clarify your roles in this protocol? Megan looked at Carla, then back at the panel. Her voice broke. We were told to comply, no questions asked. It wasn't random. We had profiles marked as discretionary. Profiles? Reyes asked sharply. What kind of profiles? Megan hesitated. Passengers who might not fit the company's image standard for VIP zones. The room went silent again. Porter leaned forward. Do you mean passengers of color? Megan nodded, eyes glassy. Yes, ma'am. The audience erupted. Reporters shouted. Flashbulbs exploded. Reyes slammed his gavel. Order. Order in this room. When it quieted, David spoke again, calm, direct. This is what I meant when I said it wasn't about a mistake. It was about a mindset. He looked straight at Richard Hale. You didn't just take my seat. You tried to take my dignity. And you did it under a system you built. Hale opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Porter clicked another slide. A new set of messages appeared on screen, this time, between the airline's marketing director and investor relations office. One line read, We need to maintain brand perception for elite travelers. Avoid overrepresentation in premium zones during investor flights. The room gasped again. Reyes turned to Hale. Mr. Hale, this message came from your direct subordinate. Did you approve these internal directives? Hale's silence said everything. Reyes pressed on. This was systemic, Mr. Hale. This wasn't about one passenger, it was company policy. A policy that treated minority travelers as brand risks. David leaned slightly toward his mic, voice steady as stone. So tell me, Mr. Hale, how much is an apology worth when your company profits off humiliation? Hale snapped. His calm broke. Do you think I wanted this to happen? He said, voice rising. This wasn't about race, it was about priority, about corporate logistics, about... Porter cut in sharp. Mr. Hale, your words are being broadcast to millions right now. I suggest you remember that. He froze. The cameras zoomed in. Every angle captured his face, guilt, fear, and frustration twisting together. Porter turned back to David. Mr. Lawson, for the record, did anyone from this airline ever reach out to you privately before this hearing? David shook his head. Only their lawyers. They wanted me to sign an NDA in exchange for a settlement. The audience gasped again. Reyes leaned forward. Did you accept? David met his eyes. I don't negotiate silence. Applause broke out across the room before the gavel struck again. Then Porter looked at the panel of witnesses. Before we conclude this session, I want to make something clear. The FAA and DOJ will continue to review every communication, every policy, every record related to this incident. And if we find evidence of deliberate discrimination, criminal charges will follow. She turned to the airline table. And that includes anyone who approved, enabled, or ignored it. The camera panned across their faces. Carla trembling, Megan crying silently, Tom staring at the floor, and Richard Hale gripping his pen so hard his knuckles turned white. Just then, Alan Reyes received a message from one of his aides sitting off camera. He read it, frowned, and passed it to Porter. She scanned it, eyes narrowing. Then she looked back at the room and said, "It appears we have a new development. Our forensic team has just uncovered internal correspondence marked Confidential VIP Access Protocol. These files weren't disclosed to us voluntarily." The room erupted again. Reporters shouted questions. The executives froze. Porter's voice cut through the noise. "These documents contain senior-level directives on passenger classification. And Mr. Hale, they bear your digital signature." David turned his head slowly toward the airline seal. Hale's eyes widened, panic flickering for the first time. The room fell completely silent. And David said quietly, "Looks like the truth just boarded the flight you tried to cancel." And as the hearing exploded into chaos, agents moved to secure new evidence, executives whispered to lawyers, and one shocking discovery inside those files would expose everything the airline had tried to hide. The room froze. No one spoke. No one even breathed. All eyes were on the screen. Those two words glowing like a live wire. Confidential VIP Access Protocol. Elaine Porter stood, voice steady but charged. "These documents were hidden from our subpoena. That's obstruction." The air felt heavy. Every lens, every camera, every microphone locked onto the airline's table. Richard Hale, the CO, looked trapped. His legal counsel leaned toward him, whispering frantically. But the microphones were still on. Everyone heard it. "Richard, do not speak, say nothing without clearance." Too late. Porter gestured to the clerk. "Project the first document on the main screen." The screen came alive with a red header. Internal Memorandum, Executive Eyes Only. Subject, Passenger Optics and Brand Experience Tier. Lines of text appeared underneath. And with each one, the audience's faces shifted from curiosity to shock. Effective immediately, passenger assignments in premium zones are to align with brand consistency standards. Ensure all VIP visibility complies with marketing tone. Demographic variance should be minimized on investor and partner routes. Porter turned slowly toward the airline table. "Mr. Hale, this was signed under your name." Hale's voice cracked slightly. I don't recall authorizing that." Reyes leaned in. "Your digital signature says otherwise. Time-stamped, IP verified, and stored on your company's own server. You can't unwrite that." The gallery erupted. Reporters shouted over each other. Cameras flashed. Porter slammed her gavel. "Order. I will clear this room if necessary." When the noise finally settled, she spoke again, cold, deliberate. "Let's read the next page." This one was shorter, but deadlier. Passengers flagged as high risk to brand perception may be reassigned at cabin manager's discretion. Criteria include behavior, attire, and, where necessary, demographic impact relative to passenger mix. The final line sent a chill through the room. Always ensure optics maintain elite continuity. Reyes exhaled. "So you're telling your staff that passengers of color are a threat to your brand image?" Hale didn't answer. Carla, the lead attendant, began to cry quietly. Her hand shook as she whispered, "We didn't write those rules. We were told to enforce them." Porter turned to her. "Ms. Johnson, who gave you those instructions?" Carla hesitated. Then she said softly, "Operations Command, under Mr. Hale's office." Gasps again. Hale's lawyer immediately stood. "My client will not respond further. This is a matter for closed legal review." Porter's reply was razor-sharp. "You'll respond here, Mr. Hale. Under oath. This hearing is public." Hale leaned toward the microphone. His voice trembled, but pride still lingered in his tone. "You don't understand how airlines operate," he said. "These decisions weren't about color. They were about image, about maintaining consistency for investors, about—" Reyes cut him off, slamming his hand on the desk. "Image doesn't give you the right to discriminate." The audience roared with agreement. David Lawson watched silently, jaw tight. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for truth, and finally it was coming out. Porter raised her hand. "Let's continue." This time, the document bore multiple names. Executives, managers, and even marketing directors, all copied in the same email chain. At the bottom, one line stood out in bold red. Brand Perception Team authorized adjustments to maintain investor appeal metrics. Reyes turned to the panel. "Investor appeal metrics? That's your excuse for humiliation." He looked directly at the crew members. "Did you ever question these orders?" Tom, one of the attendants, spoke up for the first time. "We did, but questioning orders got people blacklisted. One of our colleagues filed a complaint last year. She was terminated 2 weeks later." The gallery fell silent again. You could hear the sound of camera shutters, one after another. Porter scribbled a note, then looked up. "We'll need that name. She may be a protected witness." Tom nodded slowly. Moments later, another slide appeared, this time, a chat log between executives. The text was casual. Corporate slang hiding cruelty. Exec 1, we need the VIP cabin to look premium for photos. Exec 2, understood. Let's reshuffle seat 1A. Keep visuals balanced. Exec 1, make sure no anomalies appear on the manifest this time. Reyes read the lines out loud, his voice darkening. "No anomalies. You meant no black passengers in view of your investors." No one denied it. Not one person at that table spoke. Then came the next blow. An aide rushed to Porter with a tablet. She read the screen, her expression hardened. "Mr. Reyes, we've just received confirmation from the Federal Cyber Unit. These files were not leaked. They were deleted and reconstructed from your cloud archive." Reyes nodded. "That confirms it. They tried to wipe the evidence." He looked straight at the cameras. This wasn't a PR accident. This was a cover-up. David finally spoke again. His tone was calm, too calm. "You built a system to erase people like me," he said quietly. "Not because we did anything wrong, but because our presence didn't fit your brand." He looked at Hale. "And you thought deleting a few files would delete accountability?" The silence was unbearable. Every camera in the room zoomed in on Hale's face, his eyes glassy, his confidence gone. Porter broke the silence. "Mr. Hale, at this stage, obstruction of justice is a very real charge. If you have anything to add, now is the time." Hale's lawyer whispered urgently again. "Don't answer that." But Hale ignored him. He looked at David. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Hale said, voice cracking under the weight of truth, "Those files weren't supposed to be public. They were internal optics documents, guidelines, not policy." Reyes slammed the desk again. "You call discrimination a guideline?" The air inside that room could have shattered glass. Reporters were typing furiously. Phones buzzed with live updates. On every major network, headlines were flashing in real time. FUJ reveal hidden airline racism files. Optics protocol shocks aviation industry. So Hale under fire for systemic bias orders. Porter stood. Her final words for the day cut through the chaos like a blade. "This hearing will recess for 48 hours while forensic teams analyze these files. Mr. Hale, your company is now under full federal review. If any additional documents are found concealed, you will not walk out of this building free." The camera zoomed in on Hale's face, a mix of rage and fear. Then it turned to David. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Truth doesn't need permission to come out." As the session adjourned, chaos broke outside. Protesters shouted, reporters swarmed, the nation debated. Stock prices for the airline plummeted in real time. Within hours, multiple CEOs of competing airlines released public statements, distancing themselves from Hale's company. The industry was shifting. This wasn't just one airline scandal anymore. It was a reckoning for the entire system. But even as the world watched, one question remained unanswered. What else was inside those files? Because according to the DOJ's next update, those weren't the only documents they found. And buried deep inside those reconstructed archives was a directive so explosive, so personal, that it didn't just threaten the airline's survival. It could bring down people in power across the country. 2 days later, Washington, D.C. felt heavier. The air itself carried tension, as if the city knew something was about to break. The FAA and DOJ reconvened their joint hearing, but this time, the tone was different. The cameras weren't just covering a scandal anymore. They were witnessing history. Outside the Justice Building, the crowd had tripled. News vans stretched for blocks. Signs waved in the wind, "End discrimination in the skies. Transparency now." And one bold banner read, "No more protocols." Inside, David Lawson sat quietly at his table, calm as ever. He wasn't angry anymore. He was waiting, because what was coming was bigger than him, bigger than one flight, bigger than one airline. Elaine Porter entered first, followed by Alan Reyes. Both looked grim, focused, carrying sealed folders under their arms. They didn't take their seats immediately. Porter spoke first, voice firm and deliberate. "Before we begin," she said, "let me make something clear. What we're about to present has national implications. The evidence you're about to see was never meant for public eyes." The room stirred. Journalists shifted in their seats. Reyes opened the folder and laid out several documents, still partially redacted. He continued, "These materials were recovered from an encrypted archive tied directly to the airline's internal communications. But they didn't stop there." He paused. Those same archives connected to government servers, specifically the Department of Transportation's Aviation Compliance Division. A murmur spread across the gallery. Government servers. This wasn't just corporate anymore. Porter gestured to the technician. "Display document series 12C. At first glance, the document looked like any other memo. Header, timestamp, digital signature. But the title froze everyone. Directive, Priority Traveler Visibility Management, Joint Oversight Initiative. Reyes began reading aloud. The following procedures are designed to ensure premium visibility consistency across all partner airlines participating in the Federal Commercial Aviation Development Program. He stopped mid-sentence, then looked up. "This isn't just one airline," he said quietly. "This directive was distributed to 7 major carriers." Gasps filled the air. Cameras zoomed in. Porter leaned forward. "Explain that phrase, visibility consistency." Reyes nodded grimly. "It refers to the public image of first-class travelers, particularly during government and investor flights. In simple terms, who the public sees sitting in premium cabins." He turned to the airline table. "Your company didn't invent this discrimination, Mr. Hale. You joined it." Hale's lawyer stood immediately. "This is absurd." Porter raised her hand sharply. "Sit down. The evidence will speak for itself." The screen shifted to a second file. A correspondence between the airline's corporate office and the Aviation Oversight Council, a semi-governmental board responsible for industry image alignment. The message was short. Per federal guidance, maintain consistent optics for premium visibility zones. Adjust manifest as needed to reflect investor confidence demographics. Reyes turned toward the gallery. "You're hearing that right. A federal body told airlines to adjust who appeared in premium cabins to make their investor flights look right." Shock rippled through the room like a physical wave. David Lawson spoke for the first time. "Are you saying this came from the government?" Porter met his eyes. "Partially. Certain officials in oversight positions approved these directives years ago during a federal partnership program to boost investor image. The program was later dissolved, but the language stayed." Reyes added, "And airlines like Mr. Hale's used that language as cover to justify discriminatory actions. They twisted a flawed directive into a full-blown system." The gallery erupted. Reporters shouted over one another. Who signed it? Which officials were involved? Porter raised her voice over the noise. That's what we're about to show you. On the screen appeared a list of names. Corporate officers, marketing directors, and 2 government officials. One name stood out. Deputy Director of Aviation Oversight, Gregory Barnes. The same official who had defended the airline publicly just a week earlier. Reyes didn't hide his disgust. So while the nation debated whether this was a misunderstanding, a senior federal official was authorizing the exact language that made it possible. He looked straight into the camera. This wasn't oversight. It was collusion. The gallery erupted again. Flashbulbs. Outrage. Guess. Carla, the flight attendant, covered her mouth in disbelief. Megan whispered, "We were just following orders." David sat still, hands clasped. He had seen corporate corruption before, but not like this. Porter's tone hardened. "We have confirmed communications between Mr. Barnes and Mr. Hale's executive team approving modifications to the optics protocol." She turned to Hale. "Your company was effectively granted immunity as long as you maintain the image." Hale's composure cracked. "You think I wanted this?" he shouted suddenly. "You think any CO wants their brand tied to government optics? We were told compliance was mandatory, that our contracts depended on it." Reyes slammed the gavel. "So you're admitting it was active cooperation?" Hale froze. He realized what he'd just said. And so did everyone else. Porter spoke into the mic. "Let the record show that Richard Hale has confirmed verbal cooperation with federal directives pertaining to discriminatory optics management." The tension in that room could be cut with a knife. Then, out of nowhere, another message came in from the DOJ Tech Division. Porter read it silently, and her expression shifted again. She looked up slowly. "There's more." The monitors flickered and displayed a draft proposal, marked Classified Federal Partnership Renewal. It was dated 6 months ago, meaning this system wasn't ancient history. It was still active. The entire room went silent. David broke the silence again. "You mean to tell me this was about image and investors, and nobody thought about the people?" Reyes looked at him and nodded slowly. "That's exactly what happened." Then he turned back to the crowd. "But what's worse, these directives were renewed with taxpayer money. Your money." The uproar that followed shook the chamber. Hale slumped in his seat, defeated. For the first time, he muttered quietly, almost to himself. "They told us it was optics, not exclusion." Porter leaned closer. "Who told you that, Mr. Hale?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Barnes." The room fell dead silent again. The cameras zoomed in on Porter's face as she exchanged a glance with Reyes. Reyes turned back to the mic, his voice cold and deliberate. "Mr. Gregory Barnes is hereby being summoned under subpoena for federal questioning. Effective immediately." Outside the building, the news spread like wildfire. Breaking headlines flashed across every screen in America. Federal aviation official implicated in racism directive. CEO claims government partnership in optics scandal. Congress calls emergency review. Airlines across the country scrambled to distance themselves. The stock market shook. Corporate PR teams went into panic mode. And in that hearing room, the silence after the storm was deafening. Porter closed her folder slowly and said, "This goes beyond one company. This is systemic manipulation. And it ends now." David stood, voice calm but filled with resolve. "You built a system where image mattered more than integrity. Now the whole world's watching to see what you'll do when the image breaks." Reyes looked at him, then at Hale. "Mr. Lawson's right. The question now isn't how this happened. It's who helped you make sure it could." Porter turned to the cameras for her closing words. "This hearing will continue tomorrow morning. Deputy Director Gregory Barnes will be summoned for questioning under oath. The public deserves the truth." But that truth wouldn't come quietly, because what Barnes was about to reveal would expose the names, the power, and the deals behind the entire cover-up. And when those names hit the airwaves, it wouldn't just threaten one industry. It would shake the nation itself. It was a cold, quiet morning in Washington, D.C. Across the nation, every news outlet was locked on one live broadcast. the federal reckoning. Inside the grand chamber, cameras lined the walls. The world watched as justice prepared to speak. At the center of it all sat David Lawson, the man whose story had shaken the entire airline industry, the black CEO who had been kicked out of his own VIP seat for a white passenger. And now, across from him, sat the very people who made that decision possible: the former airline CEO Charles Barnes, the lead flight attendant, and two senior executives. The Department of Justice and FAA inspectors had gathered months of evidence. But today wasn't about paperwork. Today was about truth. The lead inspector leaned forward and said, "Mr. Barnes, for the record, did you authorize or approve company directives that allowed passenger seating to be influenced by image or appearance?" Barnes adjusted his tie. His face looked pale under the lights. "I never gave such an order," he said quietly. The inspector raised a document. "This memo came from your office, Mr. Barnes. It instructs flight crew to maintain brand consistency in premium seating, aligning with what you called investor image standards. Those standards excluded passengers who didn't fit the company's preferred look." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. The inspector turned toward the cameras. "This isn't just about one man being removed from a seat. This is about a system built on silent discrimination, a system that chose appearance over integrity." Barnes looked down, avoiding the cameras. "I didn't write that memo myself," he muttered. "It came from marketing." The inspector's tone hardened. "But you signed it, Mr. Barnes. Your initials are on the approval page." Behind him, the large display screen flickered to life. Emails, directives, and timelines filled the screen. Every audience member could see how deeply this bias had been embedded, from the cabin crew manual to executive policies. And sitting silently through it all was David Lawson, calm, composed, and listening. When the inspector finally turned to him, he asked softly, "Mr. Lawson, would you like to address the board?" David stood and approached the microphone. His voice was steady, but every word struck like a hammer. "I came here as a paying passenger, not a threat. I boarded with respect, but I was met with rejection. For months, your company denied everything, until the truth was forced into the light. You see, racism isn't always loud. Sometimes, it hides in company policies, in coded emails, in what people call standard procedure. But no matter how you dress it up, it's still wrong." The room went silent. You could hear cameras clicking, people holding their breath. David continued, "I didn't fight this battle to prove my worth. I fought it so that no one else would have to experience what I did, being told, without words, that you don't belong where you've worked hard to be." Tears welled in the eyes of some reporters. Even the FA panel looked visibly moved. The inspector nodded respectfully and said, "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, for your courage and for holding us all accountable." He then turned back toward Barnes and the executives. "Effective immediately," he announced, "the Department of Justice is recommending federal charges for discriminatory corporate practices, obstruction of investigation, and falsification of internal records. Your licenses and contracts will be reviewed, and the findings will remain public." The room erupted. Flashes, murmurs, and cheers burst through the air. Outside the building, crowds of supporters held up signs that read, "Justice for David. Respect has no color. Equality takes flight." Barnes's shoulders slumped as security escorted him and the other executives out through the side door. No more statements. No more denials. For the first time since that humiliating day on the plane, David Lawson finally felt peace. He turned toward the cameras one last time. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Lawson, how does it feel now that justice has been served?" David smiled gently and said, "It's not about revenge. It's about respect. And today, respect finally won." The crowd outside erupted into applause. For a brief moment, the air felt lighter, like the world had taken a collective breath. The inspector stood, closed the folder, and said, "This case will serve as a reminder: no company, no matter how powerful, stands above accountability." And as David walked out of that chamber, sunlight spilling over the marble steps, the world watched. Not just a man who had been wronged, but a man who refused to stay silent. He looked up toward the sky, toward the planes passing overhead, and whispered quietly, "This time, we all rise together." The screen faded to black. White letters appeared on screen. Justice isn't given. It's demanded. And today it answered. If you believe what David Lawson did today matters, if you believe that no one should ever be judged by their color, but by their character, then hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed quiet, or stood up like David did? And don't forget to subscribe, because more real-world stories like this, stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal truth, are coming your way. This is more than a story. This is a movement.